Ethan's grip tightened around his phone as he stared at the message. A picture of Sophia and her ex-husband Ryan laughing together over a candlelit dinner. Her hand on his, their smiles too intimate to be mistaken for anything else. His pulse roared in his ears. This wasn't just betrayal, this was humiliation. And the worst part? Lily, his own stepdaughter, knew. She had been covering for her mother, supporting her, even mocking Ethan behind his back. The final message cut him deeper than any knife. Ethan won't do anything. He's too weak. He needs me more than I need him. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Weak? No. He had been patient. He had given them the benefit of the doubt. But now they were going to learn exactly who they had underestimated. He picked up his keys and walked out the door. But before we dive deeper into the story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from his morning coffee, but the warmth did nothing to ease the cold knot in his stomach. Across from him, Sophia scrolled through her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. It had become a pattern, a routine so predictable it was almost scripted. 5 years ago, when they married, their mornings had been filled with quiet laughter and soft touches, stolen kisses over scrambled eggs. Now, silence had settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Sophia had changed. She was no longer the woman he had fallen in love with, no longer the woman who had once clung to him as if he were her safe place. She was distant, distracted, her eyes always darting toward the phone that never left her hand. It was as if she had built a wall between them, brick by brick, and Ethan had no idea how to break through. Lily sat at the other end of the table, her expression one of habitual disinterest. 19 and full of attitude, she barely acknowledged Ethan as anything more than an unwanted presence in her mother's life. He had tried. God, he had tried. When he married Sophia, he knew Lily came with the package, and he had been ready to embrace the role of stepfather. But Lily had never given him a chance. She wasn't outright cruel, not anymore at least, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. He would never be her father, and she would never see him as family. And that was fine. He could live with that. What he couldn't live with was the gnawing suspicion that something was terribly wrong in his marriage. It started small, little things that on their own wouldn't have meant much. Sophia working late more often, her phone buzzing with messages she never let him see, the way she would angle the screen away whenever he walked by. She had never been one to obsess over social media, but now she was glued to it, always typing, always reacting to something he wasn't allowed to be a part of. The intimacy between them had all but vanished. If he reached for her, she would flinch, claim she was tired, stressed, overwhelmed. And maybe she was, but Ethan knew better. A man knows when his wife no longer sees him the same way. A man knows when he's being replaced, even if the evidence hasn't yet slapped him in the face. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination. Maybe he was overthinking things, maybe he was being paranoid, but the gut feeling wouldn't go away. It whispered in his ear at night when he lay beside Sophia in bed, feeling the cold space between them that used to be filled with warmth. It clawed at him when she came home late, her excuses vague, her stories inconsistent. It gnawed at his patience when he saw the way she smiled at her phone, a smile that hadn't been directed at him in months. Ethan wasn't stupid. He had seen this before, not in his own relationships but in others. Friends who had ignored the signs until it was too late. Coworkers who had walked in on their worst nightmares. He didn't want to be that man, the fool who turned a blind eye until his world collapsed around him. His mind replayed the moments that had stood out over the past few months, the ones he had tried to brush aside but could no longer ignore. The night she had come home well past midnight, claiming she had lost track of time with some girlfriends he had never heard of before. The way she had dismissed his concern with an airy laugh, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek as if that would erase the doubt in his eyes. The whispered phone calls that ended the moment he walked into the room. The scent of cologne that wasn't his, clinging to her clothes when she hugged him absent-mindedly. These weren't coincidences. These weren't innocent mistakes. Deep down, Ethan knew what was happening. He just didn't want to say it out loud, because once he did, it would make it real. And if it was real, then it meant his marriage wasn't just struggling, it was dying. The thought made his stomach churn, made his fingers tighten around the coffee mug in his hands. He had given Sophia everything, his love, his loyalty, his trust, and if she had thrown it all away for someone else. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed proof. He needed to know for sure before he made any rash decisions, because if his suspicions were correct, then he wasn't just going to sit back and let her destroy him. No. If Sophia was betraying him, she had no idea what was coming. Ethan sat in his home office, staring at the computer screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The urge to confront Sophia right away burned in his chest, but he knew better. Acting on emotion wouldn't get him anywhere. It would only tip her off, make her more careful. If she was cheating, if she was lying to his face every day, then he needed undeniable proof, something solid, something that couldn't be twisted into an excuse. His mind raced through the possibilities, the what-ifs, the scenarios that could either confirm his worst fears or make him feel like a paranoid fool. He wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions without evidence, but he also wasn't going to sit around and let someone make a fool out of him. After a long moment of hesitation, he exhaled and pulled up a secure website for private investigative services. He had heard about them before, discreet professionals who specialized in uncovering secrets, tracking infidelity, and providing hard proof. A few clicks later, he found exactly what he was looking for: a high-end investigator, someone with a reputation for being relentless, someone who didn't just gather evidence but built airtight cases. The price tag was steep, $5,000 for a full surveillance package, but Ethan didn't care. Money wasn't the issue. His dignity, his sanity, his peace of mind. That was what mattered. He reached for his phone, dialing the number listed on the site. A deep, calm voice answered on the third ring. "This is Daniel Reeves. How can I help you?" Ethan cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I need answers," he said, keeping his words careful. "I think my wife is cheating on me." There was a brief silence on the other end, then the investigator spoke again, his tone professional, direct. "How certain are you?" Ethan clenched his jaw. 80%. "Good enough," Reeves replied. "Tell me everything." For the next 15 minutes, Ethan laid it all out. Sophia's distant behavior, her sudden obsession with her phone, the late nights, the inconsistencies in her stories, the way she flinched when he touched her, the gut feeling that refused to go away. He kept his tone controlled, giving only the facts, trying not to let emotions seep in. Reeves listened without interruption, taking notes, occasionally asking short, precise questions. When Ethan finished, the investigator didn't waste time with unnecessary reassurances. "I'll need access to her phone records," Reeves said. "If she has a second phone, I need to know. I'll track her movements, place a GPS on her car, set up surveillance. If she's cheating, we'll know within a week." Ethan nodded, gripping his phone tighter. "I want hard proof," he said. "Photos, videos, messages, whatever it takes." Reeves didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll be in touch." The call ended and Ethan sat there for a long moment, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had done it. The wheels were in motion. In 7 days, he would have an answer, whether he was ready for it or not. The week crawled by, each day feeling heavier than the last. Ethan went through the motions of normal life, forcing himself to act natural around Sophia, pretending not to notice when she pulled away, when she smiled at her phone, when she slipped out for hours with vague explanations. Every time she laughed at something on her screen, every time she forgot to mention where she had been, the suspicion inside him grew like a slow-burning fire. Then, on the 7th day, Reeves called. "We need to meet." Ethan's stomach twisted. "That bad?" A pause. "You'll want to see for yourself." An hour later, Ethan sat across from Reeves in a quiet cafe, his fingers curled around a cup of black coffee he had no intention of drinking. The investigator slid a manila envelope across the table, his face unreadable. "Everything you need is in there," he said. Ethan hesitated, his pulse hammering in his throat. Then, with a slow, measured breath, he opened the envelope. The first thing he saw was a set of photographs. Sophia, in a parking lot, in a dress he hadn't seen before, stepping out of her car, walking toward a man. Ethan's fingers tightened as he flipped to the next photo. Ryan, his wife's ex-husband. The same man she had sworn she would never go near again. The same man who had once made her life a living hell. The next photo showed them together, close, too close, the way she smiled at him, the way he placed his hand on her lower back, the way they walked side by side, disappearing into a hotel lobby. The timestamps on the photos confirmed everything. She had been meeting Ryan for weeks. Ethan kept flipping through the evidence. Receipts for expensive gifts, messages retrieved from deleted records, sweet, intimate words exchanged in secret, plans to be together. Sophia was leaving him. She had been planning it all along. A cold, hollow sensation spread through Ethan's chest. He had expected to feel rage, but all he felt in that moment was clarity. A brutal, undeniable realization that his marriage had already ended, it just hadn't been finalized yet. He glanced up at Reeves, his expression blank. "Does she know you were watching?" The investigator shook his head. "Not yet." Ethan closed the envelope, set it down on the table, and exhaled slowly. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, absolute, but he wasn't going to explode. Wasn't going to let emotions dictate his next move. No. If Sophia thought she had won, if she thought she could destroy him and walk away unscathed, she had no idea what was coming. Ethan sat at the breakfast table, his fingers wrapped around the coffee mug, the warmth doing nothing to chase away the cold knot of rage and betrayal in his stomach. Across from him, Sophia flipped absent-mindedly through a magazine, her phone resting face down beside her plate, a habit she had picked up over the past few months. Lily sat next to her, scrolling through her phone, her usual air of detached arrogance settling over her like a shield. The clinking of utensils, the occasional rustle of the pages Sophia turned, and the distant hum of a morning news segment on TV were the only sounds filling the room. Then, as if she were commenting on the weather, Sophia spoke. "I'll be leaving next week. I'll be staying with Ryan for a month." Ethan stilled, his grip tightening on his mug. He forced himself to lift his eyes slowly, meeting hers with a calmness he didn't feel. "Come again?" She placed her magazine down, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle on the tablecloth. "It's his birthday next month," she said casually. "I want to be there for him. You know, make it special." His pulse pounded in his ears, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "So let me get this straight. You're leaving me for a month to be with your ex-husband, to celebrate his birthday." Sophia sighed like he was being difficult. "It's not like that, Ethan. I'm telling you up front so it's not cheating." Something inside him snapped into place. Not anger, not pain, just the cold crystallized confirmation of what he already knew. "Oh, I see," he said, setting his coffee down with deliberate care. "Since you told me that makes it okay. That means I should just sit here and wait while you play house with your ex?" Sophia gave an exaggerated shrug. "It's just a month. We have history, Ethan. You knew that when you married me." His mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Right. And this history of yours, what does that include? Cooking for him, cleaning up after him, sleeping with him? Or is this just a charity service where you're volunteering to be his maid with benefits?" Sophia's expression darkened, her casual air cracking just slightly. "Don't be disgusting, Ethan. I am not some cheap mistress." "No?" He tilted his head, eyes sharp. "Then what exactly would you call it?" Sophia crossed her arms, her voice firm now, a challenge laced beneath her words. "I'll be his wife for a month." Ethan let Sophia's words settle in the air between them, their weight pressing down like a slow, crushing force. "I'll be his wife for a month." The audacity, the sheer arrogance of it made his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to stay calm. Before he could respond, a quiet chuckle broke the silence. "Lily." She leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips as she glanced up from her phone, her expression one of open amusement. "Honestly, Ethan, what's the big deal? She has her needs, you don't own her." Ethan turned his gaze toward her, his body still, his hands loose at his sides, but inside something dark coiled tight in his chest. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The casualness, the complete lack of hesitation. The way she looked at him, as if he were some clueless idiot finally catching up to a joke everyone else had been laughing at for weeks. His mind started piecing things together at a frightening speed. Lily wasn't just defending her mother. She knew. She had known all along. The secrecy, the smirks, the way she had become more dismissive toward him in recent months. It wasn't just teenage rebellion. She hadn't just watched this happen. She had been a part of it, encouraging it, supporting it, planning it. His stomach twisted with disgust, but outwardly he gave nothing away. He studied her, the sharp tilt of her chin, the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. She was enjoying this. She wanted him to be humiliated, to be powerless. And that was the moment it hit him. This wasn't just Sophia's betrayal. This was theirs. They had done this together. They had laughed behind his back, made plans, counted down the days. Ethan exhaled slowly, his pulse steady even as something inside him grew razor-sharp. He had spent years providing for them, protecting them, making sure they had everything they needed, and in return, they had mocked him. But if they thought he was just going to sit there and let it happen, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Ethan didn't lash out. He didn't slam his fist on the table or throw accusations at Sophia and Lily. That was what they expected. That was what they wanted. To see him lose control, to watch him unravel. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable, and nodded slowly as if considering her words. Then, with the same calculated ease he used in business negotiations, he spoke. "If that's how you feel, Sophia, I won't stand in your way." His voice was calm, almost indifferent. He reached for a folder he had prepared the night before and slid it across the table toward her. "Before you go, I need you to sign this." Sophia frowned, glancing down at the crisp stack of papers. "What is this?" "Just something to make things easier for both of us," Ethan said. "A legal separation agreement. For the next 30 days, you'll be officially on your own. No financial support from me, no shared resources. I won't be responsible for you or Lily in any way." He smiled slightly, as if he were offering her a gift. "And, of course, since we're separated, I'll also be free to do whatever I want." Lily scoffed. Wow, that was fast. Already planning to replace Mom? Ethan didn't even look at her. His eyes were on Sophia, waiting. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then her lips curled into a knowing smirk. She thought she had won, that he was giving in, making it easy for her. "Fine," she said, reaching for a pen. "If this makes you feel better, I'll sign it." She didn't read a single word. She didn't check the fine print. She just scrawled her name across the bottom and slid it back to him. Ethan folded the document neatly and placed it in his briefcase. "Perfect," he said smoothly. "Now you can go enjoy your month with Ryan, and I'll take care of my own needs." He stood, his movements calm, controlled. "I'll handle all the paperwork. You don't have to worry about a thing." Sophia barely suppressed a laugh. "Thanks, Ethan. I appreciate it." Ethan smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Oh, trust me, Sophia, I know you do." That same day, while Sophia packed her bags, Ethan was setting his plan into motion. He drove to his bank, where he emptied their joint account, transferring every last cent into his personal offshore account. By the time Sophia realized what had happened, it would be too late. Next, he handled Lily's car, the one she had taken for granted for years. He sold it within hours, taking the cash and locking it away where neither of them could touch it. Then, with a few keystrokes, he rerouted all his financial assets, closing credit lines Sophia had access to, and locking down investments she thought she could rely on. He left her with nothing. No safety net, no backup plan, no lifeline. The final step was filing for divorce under the grounds of adultery, backed by the overwhelming evidence the private investigator had gathered. He submitted the paperwork without hesitation, sealing her fate before she even stepped foot in Ryan's house. Sophia thought she was walking away with everything, but she had no idea that by the time she realized what was happening, she would have nothing left at all. Sophia hummed to herself as she packed, an almost giddy energy radiating off her. She moved through the bedroom like a woman who had already won, carelessly tossing dresses and heels into her suitcase, barely bothering to fold them. Every now and then she'd pause to check her phone, smiling at whatever message had just come through. Ethan didn't have to guess who it was from. She didn't even bother hiding it anymore. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her with an unreadable expression, his hands loosely clasped in his lap. She barely spared him a glance. "You're taking this better than I expected," she said with amusement, zipping up the suitcase with one smooth motion. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Would you rather I beg you to stay?" She laughed, shaking her head. "No, that would be pathetic. Honestly, this is easier. No drama, no scenes, just two adults accepting reality." She slung a designer purse over her shoulder, her nails tapping against the leather. "You'll see, Ethan, this is for the best. I'll be back in a month and things will be different." Lily strolled into the room, arms crossed, wearing that same smirk she had worn at breakfast. "Dad, don't look so sad," she teased, the word dad laced with sarcasm. "Mom just needs a break, and honestly, so do you. Maybe you'll finally learn how to relax." Ethan let his gaze flick to her, and for a brief moment he considered telling her what he had done, letting her see just how deep their mistake had been. But no, it was too soon. Let them enjoy this moment. Let them bask in their supposed victory. The fall would be so much sweeter when they realized just how wrong they were. Sophia brushed a hand through her hair, checking her reflection in the mirror one last time. "You'll be fine, Ethan," she said, her voice light. "You're a big boy. You'll survive without me." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, her tone almost pitying. "I hope you take this time to think about things, about how much I've sacrificed, about how unfair it's been for me all these years." She reached up, smoothing the collar of his shirt as if she were still his wife, as if she hadn't just ripped their marriage apart. "And maybe next time you won't take me for granted." Ethan held her gaze, his expression giving away nothing. "Oh, don't worry, Sophia," he said, voice cool. "I won't make that mistake again." She took it as agreement, smiling brightly. "Good." She turned to Lily. "Come on, sweetheart, Ryan's waiting." Lily grabbed her bag and followed her mother out, throwing one last smug glance over her shoulder. "Don't have too much fun without us." Ethan sat there, listening to the sound of their laughter echoing down the hall, the front door swinging open, then slamming shut. The silence that followed was deafening. He exhaled slowly, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. He imagined them getting into the car, driving off to Ryan's place, thinking they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his suit, his expression calm as he stepped into the grand ballroom. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the distant laughter of the city's elite filled the air. It was an evening of celebration, a gathering of powerful people, a place where reputations were made and solidified. He moved through the crowd with ease, nodding at familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries as if nothing in his life had changed. No one could tell that just days ago his wife had walked out on him, that his so-called stepdaughter had mocked him on her way out the door. Across the room, Sophia stood next to Lily, both dressed in their finest, radiating confidence. Sophia's dress was new, undoubtedly purchased with what she assumed was still their money. She laughed, tilting her head back slightly, her hand resting lightly on Lily's arm as if they were sharing some inside joke. From the way she carried herself, the way she held her wineglass with effortless elegance, it was obvious she had convinced herself that she had won, that Ethan had accepted his fate as the discarded husband, the fool left behind while she moved on to something better. Lily glanced around the room, her sharp eyes scanning for familiar faces. When her gaze landed on Ethan, she nudged her mother and whispered something. Sophia turned, her lips curling into a slow, knowing smile. She raised her glass slightly in his direction, a silent toast to her victory. Ethan returned the gesture with a slight nod, his face unreadable, his body language relaxed, composed. They thought he was just here to play nice, to keep up appearances, to maintain whatever dignity he had left after their betrayal. They thought he was weak, that he had moved on like a good little ex-husband, swallowing his pride while they thrived. Ethan took a sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid burning slightly as it slid down his throat. He let the warmth settle in his chest as he allowed them their moment. Let them believe it. Let them laugh. Let them think they had won. Because in just a few minutes, their entire world was about to come crashing down. Ethan swirled the whiskey in his glass, letting the anticipation simmer just beneath the surface. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, the kind of atmosphere where people thrived on social posturing and carefully curated images. Sophia was in her element, effortlessly charming the guests, flashing that same radiant smile she had once reserved for him. Lily stood by her side, the perfect accomplice, whispering and giggling, basking in the attention. They had no idea the night was about to take a turn they would never recover from. Ethan took a slow sip, then set his glass down with precise deliberation. He straightened his jacket, then strode toward the center of the room where a small gathering had formed around Sophia. A few acquaintances acknowledged him, some greeting him with polite nods, but his focus remained locked on the woman who had betrayed him. When he stopped just a few feet away, Sophia finally noticed his presence. She smiled, tilting her head slightly as if amused. "Ethan," she purred, her voice sweet but condescending. "I didn't expect to see you here." He smiled back, cool and unreadable. Didn't want to miss the celebration. Sophia chuckled lightly as if she were humoring him, then turned back to her conversation. Lily smirked, barely glancing in his direction before murmuring something under her breath. The people around them exchanged looks, picking up on the unspoken tension. Ethan could feel the weight of their eyes, the curiosity, the anticipation of some social drama unfolding before them. Perfect. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone with slow, deliberate movements. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned the volume up, just enough for the sound to cut through the chatter. At first, it was just a soft murmur, a quiet rustling of fabric, the muted sound of a hotel door closing. Then, a voice. Sophia's voice. "I can't believe how good this feels again, Ryan." The shift in the room was instantaneous. Conversations died, laughter stopped, heads turned. Sophia froze. The color drained from her face, her fingers tightening around her wine glass as the sound of her own voice filled the air. Lily's smirk disappeared. The guests exchanged stunned glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to disbelief as the audio continued. "I've missed you so much. Ethan has no idea. God, I've been lying to his face for months." A sharp inhale from someone in the crowd, a low murmur, eyes widening in realization. Ethan kept his gaze locked on Sophia, watching as her confident facade cracked, as panic flickered behind her eyes. He let the audio play a little longer, just enough to hear Ryan's voice now, low and familiar. "He's pathetic. You deserve better." Then, the unmistakable rustle of sheets. Ethan tapped the screen, pausing the recording. The silence in the room was deafening. He let it linger for a moment, let the weight of the revelations settle in. Then, without a word, he swiped to the next piece of evidence. A series of screenshots filled the screen, text messages, explicit, unfiltered. Sophia pouring her heart out to Ryan, saying things Ethan had never heard from her in years. Plans to run away together, complaints about how boring Ethan was, how he was nothing compared to Ryan, how she was relieved to finally feel alive again. He turned the phone outward, letting everyone see, letting them read. A gasp from one of the women nearby, a quiet, "Oh my God," from another. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." Sophia looked like she wanted to run. Her breath hitched, her grip unsteady on the glass in her hand. Lily, for once, had nothing to say. Ethan's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm. Too calm. "You know, Sophia," he said, tilting his head slightly, "you were right. This is for the best." Then, without another word, he slid his phone back into his pocket, picked up his whiskey, and took another sip. Let her drown in the wreckage. Sophia's fingers trembled around the stem of her wine glass, her face draining of all color as the weight of what had just happened crashed down on her. The confident, smug woman who had walked into this party as if she owned the world was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered, exposed, vulnerable. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her perfectly curated mask had shattered in front of everyone. Lily stood frozen beside her, clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The smirk that had been plastered on her face all night had vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed look of pure shock. For the first time, she looked young, uncertain, weak. She had been so sure, so convinced that she and her mother were untouchable, that Ethan was nothing more than a joke, an afterthought. Now, with every pair of eyes in the room locked onto them, with whispers and muffled gasps spreading like wildfire, she realized how wrong she had been. A sharp whisper cut through the silence. Did she really cheat with him? Someone else murmured, and she was acting like he was the problem? Another voice hushed but dripping with disbelief. Jesus, she didn't even bother to hide it. She thought she could just get away with it? Sophia's breathing was uneven now, her chest rising and falling rapidly as panic took over. She looked around frantically, searching for an escape, for something, anything to make this nightmare stop. But there was no escaping this. Not here, not now. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a shaky, barely audible, "This isn't..." But it was exactly what it looked like. Lily finally found her voice, though it was weak, strained. This is insane," she muttered, her eyes darting between Ethan and the stunned faces of their so-called friends. "Why would you..." Ethan simply raised an eyebrow, his expression cold. "Why would I what? Tell the truth?" Lily flinched. For the first time she realized there was no ground left beneath her feet, no power, no upper hand. They had come here thinking they were above him, that he would shrink, that he would sulk in some corner while they paraded around in victory. But instead, they were the ones standing under a spotlight, stripped bare, their secrets thrown into the open for all to see. Sophia clenched her jaw, swallowing down whatever excuse she had been about to make. Her hands shook as she set her wine glass down on the nearest table with forced composure. She wanted to run, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, ignoring the whispering voices, the judgmental stares, and turned to Ethan with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "You've made your little scene. I hope you feel better about yourself." Ethan exhaled, then gave her the smallest, coldest smile. "Oh, I feel fantastic." Ethan didn't bother staying to watch the full extent of their humiliation. He had delivered the final blow, and that was enough. He walked out of the party with the same calmness he had walked in with, leaving Sophia and Lily to drown in the wreckage. As soon as he stepped outside, he inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air clear away the last remnants of their voices. He checked his phone, switched it to Do Not Disturb, and called for his driver. It was time to disappear. For the next week, Ethan became a ghost. No calls, no texts, no emails. He took time for himself, something he hadn't done in years. He booked a first-class flight out of the country, spending a week in a private villa overlooking the Caribbean, drinking expensive whiskey and watching the ocean waves crash against the shore. He didn't think about Sophia. He didn't think about Lily. They weren't his problem anymore. He focused on himself, on the quiet satisfaction of knowing that while they were scrambling, panicking, trying to figure out where he had gone, he was somewhere far away, untouched by their chaos. Sophia, of course, had tried calling him repeatedly. The first few days, her calls came every few hours, her texts switching between demands and fake concern. "We need to talk. Where are you? Ethan, stop being childish and call me back. You're acting crazy. Answer your phone." When that didn't work, her messages turned more frantic. "The bank is saying the account is empty. Where's the money? Why isn't my credit card working? What did you do?" Ethan chuckled as he sipped his drink, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Let her panic. Let her feel what it was like to be powerless. By the end of the week, the desperation had fully set in. Her last message had been a simple one. "Ethan, please, we need to talk. Just tell me what's going on." He ignored it. They had made their choices. Now they had to live with them. When Ethan finally returned home, his lawyer was already waiting for him. Everything was in place. The divorce papers had been drawn up, the financial transfers had been finalized, and the legal destruction of Sophia's life was about to begin. The next morning, Sophia received an envelope. She tore it open, her hands shaking as she pulled out the stack of legal documents. The first thing she saw was the official petition for divorce under grounds of adultery. The next was the signed separation agreement she had so carelessly scribbled her name on without reading. And then, the photos. She gasped, flipping through them in horror. Every single meeting with Ryan, every hotel visit, every moment of betrayal, documented, time-stamped, undeniable. The evidence was airtight. She had no leverage, no way to spin this. When she walked into court a week later, she still carried herself with some degree of arrogance, as if she thought she could manipulate her way out of it. But as soon as Ethan's lawyer stood up and began speaking, that confidence cracked. He presented the judge with everything: the photos, the messages, the receipts, the recorded conversations. It was overwhelming. Sophia tried to interject, to defend herself, but the judge barely acknowledged her. The legal separation agreement alone sealed her fate. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, his tone firm, "you willingly signed a document relinquishing any financial support during this period. Given the overwhelming evidence of infidelity, this court sees no grounds for you to claim any compensation from your husband." Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. The reality was sinking in now. She had walked into this thinking she still had control, that she could leave Ethan, humiliate him, and come back whenever she pleased. Instead, she was leaving with nothing. The judge looked over the final documents, then gave one last decisive statement. "Divorce granted. Mr. Carter, you are under no obligation to provide further financial assistance to your former spouse or her daughter." Ethan didn't even glance at Sophia. He simply stood, nodded at his lawyer, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. He had won. Sophia stepped out of the cab, her suitcase clutched in one hand, her phone gripped tightly in the other. The neighborhood was nothing like the pristine, upper-class lifestyle she had grown accustomed to with Ethan. The house in front of her was smaller, older, with peeling paint and a cracked driveway littered with empty beer cans. She hesitated for a moment, a sinking feeling settling deep in her stomach. This wasn't how she had pictured it. Ryan opened the door, leaning against the frame with a smirk. "Took you long enough," he said, arms crossed over his chest. Sophia forced a smile, ignoring the warning signs screaming at her from every angle. "I had a rough couple of weeks." Ryan laughed, stepping aside to let her in. The smell of alcohol hit her immediately, mixed with the faint staleness of a house that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. She glanced around, taking in the mess, the unwashed dishes in the sink, the empty takeout containers on the coffee table, the stained carpet. This wasn't the life Ethan had given her. This wasn't the luxury she had convinced herself she deserved. She placed her suitcase down, taking a slow breath. "I just need some time to figure things out." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Figure what out? I thought this was what you wanted." She nodded quickly. "It is." But it didn't take long for the illusion to shatter completely. The first night he came home drunk, slamming doors, yelling about something she barely understood. The second night he accused her of looking at another man at the grocery store. By the end of the week, she had a bruise on her arm from where he had grabbed her too hard. It was happening all over again. She had told herself Ryan had changed, that they were different now, that their past mistakes were behind them, but she had been wrong. He hadn't changed at all. The only thing that had changed was her situation. She was no longer the woman who could walk away from him and fall into Ethan's arms. She had destroyed that life. She had chosen this. And now she was trapped. Lily slammed the door behind her, throwing her bag onto the floor of the tiny apartment she had been forced to move into. Her hands shook with frustration as she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her bank app again, hoping that somehow, some way, the numbers had changed. But they hadn't. Her balance was still zero. The college fund Ethan had set up for her, gone. The car she had once flaunted on social media, sold. Every financial safety net she had relied on, every privilege she had taken for granted had vanished overnight. She had nothing. No backup plan, no trust fund, no cushy future. And she hated it. She had always looked down on Ethan, rolling her eyes at his quiet discipline, his calm nature, the way he never reacted the way she expected him to. She had thought he was weak, predictable. But now, for the first time, she understood. He had played her. She had been so sure she was on the winning side, so convinced that she and her mother could walk all over him, that he would just accept it. But he hadn't. He had set them up to fail without them even realizing it. Her mother was stuck with an abusive man and she was stuck living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. Ethan hadn't just left them. He had made sure they would never recover. Ethan sat on the balcony of his new penthouse overlooking the city skyline, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his phone in the other. He had received dozens of missed calls from Sophia and Lily over the past few weeks, each one more desperate than the last. He never answered. He never would. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with them. He didn't need to yell, didn't need to seek revenge in some dramatic fashion. The beauty of it all was that they had destroyed themselves. He had simply stepped aside and let them. He scrolled through the last message Sophia had sent him. "I'm sorry. Please, Ethan, I made a mistake. I need you. I don't know what to do." He smirked, then deleted it without replying. Sophia was exactly where she belonged, with the man she had chosen, living in the mess she had walked into willingly. And Lily, the girl who had once mocked him, who had reveled in his humiliation, now had no future, no stability, no one to rely on. They had thought they were invincible. Now they were nothing. So what would you do if you were in Ethan's shoes? Would you have forgiven Sophia, given her another chance, let her come crawling back? Or would you have done what Ethan did, made sure that the people who betrayed him felt every ounce of the consequences they deserved? Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. Some people don't deserve second chances. And sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about walking away and letting them destroy themselves. Ethan didn't have to lift a finger to ruin Sophia and Lily's lives. They did it all on their own. All he had to do was sit back and watch as the fire they started consumed everything they had left. Karma always wins. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Would you have handled things differently, or do you believe that sometimes walking away is the most powerful move of all? Like, comment, and share if you believe justice was served.